Welcome to the Middle Way Podcast. My name is Dr. Matthew Goodman. This podcast is about seeing the world through the lens of interconnectedness. It's about recognizing our common humanity and discovering pragmatic solutions to improve well-being from the individual to the collective. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome back to the Middle Way. I hope everyone's doing well. There's certainly a lot happening in the world right now, and I hope that you're taking good care of yourself. I know that personally, I've really benefited from slowing down even more in the mornings, adding extra time to my meditation, or spending that time to go for a nice long walk. I've been walking in this neighborhood that's adjacent to me called Hancock Park, which is a really old and historic neighborhood in Los Angeles, and it has these big, beautiful houses. And walking through that neighborhood, for some reason, is just so regulating and grounding for me. And normally I'm walking through there, gazing up at these houses and really just having that sense of, oh, this would be so cool. Someday maybe I can have a house like this or live in this neighborhood or something like that. But really, more recently, I've been trying to just focus on the sense of having enough right now. So, in walking through that neighborhood, just appreciating the ability to walk through that neighborhood and to enjoy it, even though maybe I don't have a house in there, but I'm walking in there and I can still enjoy it, and appreciating and being grateful for what I do have in my life right now. And I know it sounds kind of corny and trite, but I really think that this is so important for our well-being and so difficult to do as human beings, as we're always looking towards the future and always trying to find some sort of happiness and satisfaction in something other than the present moment. But these walks have been a great reminder for me just to try to be present with each and every moment, to appreciate what's around us, slow down. And I'm really grateful for that because it's been setting a great tempo for the day. And with that, we will jump to the topic of today's podcast, which is related in a way because we're talking about ego, but on the collective level. In this episode, I'm going to go through basically an article that I wrote that's published on Medium. The link is in the show notes, but this is on the paradox of progress, how technology creates the illusion for us of a better tomorrow, but can paradoxically leave us in a world where we experience perhaps more suffering. That's the question that I'm posing in this episode is technology creating more or less human suffering? And how does it do that? And are we addicted to the process of technology and control over the world, much like someone who is struggling with an addiction on an individual level is under the spell of a better illusion of tomorrow through more control and through temporarily satisfying and relieving the pain that we have under this belief that tomorrow will be better versus just being with today. So with that, we'll jump right into the episode. If you have any comments, feedback, questions, I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic, or more generally, just any feedback on the podcast, ideas that you have, or guests that you would like to hear. Please send me an email at hello@the-middle-way.com. You can also visit the Middle Way website, the-middle-way.com. There are lots of offerings on there. You can also connect on Instagram. My handle is at Matthew Goodman PhD. So I'd love to connect with you there as well. And with that, the paradox of progress, technological addiction, and the illusion of a better tomorrow. We seem to face a number of important questions about the future as we witness the continual rise of technology. What will humans do with their free time once work is replaced by robots? Will we be free to enjoy a life of more luxury, convenience, and absence of worry? What will humans do once AI has the capacity to solve more problems? Will we be free from experiencing anxiety about the future? What pain will we suffer once technology cures all mental and physical illness? And what will be the purpose of life once technology diminishes or even eliminates the existential fear of death? These are the questions that we face about the future. But actually, implicit in these questions are assumptions that I believe are wrong and reckless. Assumptions that, without serious reflection and reconsideration, may lead humanity down a path of more and not less suffering. That technology will create more free time and convenience. That technology will reduce worry and anxiety about future problems. That technology will lead to the elimination or reduction of pain and suffering and even death. These are all assumptions that perhaps we have backwards. What if, so long as we continue to fuel the current technological paradigm and the direction that we're heading, what if we end up more busy and distracted in the future and not less? What if the problems we face individually and collectively and the anxiety that we have about those threats grows instead of diminishes? What if we find that despite our growing list of scientific and medical achievements, our internal experience as human beings is plagued by more suffering, more discontent, and anguish, contrary to the belief that these can be pacified? This is the alternative reality that I hope that we can at least entertain. The reasons for believing this alternative is possible, I believe, is not very far fetched. In fact, the evidence of such a future has been given to us, has been mirrored to us at every step of humanity's ascent. So let's take a trip back and examine how this has unfolded and what it potentially means about the future of the human experience. So, this podcast and the article that goes along with it, and my thinking more broadly on this topic, has been very much inspired by the work of Charles Eisenstein. In Charles's book, The Ascent of Humanity, Eisenstein demonstrates how the project of science and technology, which is the quest to understand and control the world, respectively, understanding being through science, control being through technology, has failed time and again to deliver the seeming utopia that it offers to us, that it promises to us. So, this paradigm of progress, of science and technology, carries a certain mantra. It carries certain assumptions or beliefs embedded within it. And that mantra is just a little bit more, just a little more science and technology, and then we'll finally be there. Then we'll finally get to that utopia. And when that doesn't work, the mantra continues just a little bit more, just a little bit more. We're almost there. We've almost reached that destination where we've solved all the problems and human suffering is eliminated and we have nothing more to worry about. Complete control over the world. But I believe that this process is actually very much akin to the process of addiction. Throughout this journey of seeking to gain more control over the world to reach this destination, we never actually reach that horizon. This is an illusory horizon that we keep heading towards. And the effort and the means to reach this illusory destination become even greater and more complex as we go along. we become increasingly hooked by the promise that just a little bit more control will finally satiate us, will finally take care of our needs. This time it'll work. Just a little bit more control and things will be better. This is the mindset underlying the addiction to technology. But I think that we have to examine that mindset more closely and ask ourselves, what are we actually aiming for here? And is this project, is this promise of reducing human suffering through the project of science and technology and control, leading to less human suffering in the world? And if not, how can we adjust it so that it serves our psychological and spiritual needs as human beings and not just our material needs? To assume that something will work in the future, we should have some proof that it's worked in the past. So if we take a look back at technology and how it's worked for us, well, of course, technology, of course, has allowed humans to progress and evolve in so many remarkable ways. This is stating the obvious. The evidence is all around us in all the ways that we've progressed. All we have to do is look around and look at all of the things that we've achieved and developed as human beings. The evidence is right there in front of us. Technology equals progress. Technology helps us evolve more complex and intelligent ways of interacting with the world. But there's a deeper question that I care more about that I hope we can ask here. And that's, does technology decrease human suffering or does it add to it? I don't think we ask that question enough. Of course, technology has decreased human suffering in so many physical, material ways as far as curing diseases, although it's also caused a lot of disease. And of course, it's helped to eliminate problems like world hunger, access to clean water, all of these things I have no issue with. But this is all used as justification, the only justification to continue with the paradigm that we live within of this continual ascent or advance of technology and science as we live in it today. But what we fail to reflect on, I believe, is this question of, how does it impact us internally as human beings? Do we suffer more or less within this current technological and scientific paradigm as human beings? What's our experience of living? What's our experience of life from birth to death? Are we suffering less or more? Of course, there are a lot of things that are happening in the world right now that are contributing to our experience of suffering that don't necessarily have to do with technology and science, but they also seem to be very tied up in this same paradigm. And my sense, and I could be wrong, is that we're suffering greatly as human beings right now. So if we look at some other evidence of how we're doing internally, we know that mental health is as big of a problem as it's ever been. Suicide is as big of a problem as it's ever been. Addiction is as big of a problem as it's ever been. We've taken care of our outer physical material needs, but internally we're suffering so much. We seem to have learned how to decrease our physical suffering, but maybe somehow through this project of control, we've actually conditioned ourselves to be able to have less tolerance to suffering because of the promise of more control, because of the addiction to being able to get rid of any sort of discomfort and the promise of a better tomorrow, that addiction of continuing to put all of our faith in a better tomorrow has left us less equipped to be content in this moment, to be content right here. So we constantly find ourselves distracting ourselves to deal through technology to deal with the emotional pain that I think we all feel. And we also find ourselves leaning more and more into the future in order to escape the present moment and because there is a better future promised to us somewhere else than right now. So we've lost the capacity to be here, to be present, to enjoy this moment, which is, of course, where human happiness lies. If we can't find human happiness here right now in this exact moment, and we're under the illusion that it's somewhere else, and I think this is just very human. But if that's the case, then we are basically bound for suffering. And I think that egoic process, that addiction egoic process is actually inflating within the human psyche right now. Hopefully, as a symptom, as a way to help guide us back to our truer nature or to a different way of being in the world, as all symptoms do, I believe. So let's come back to this question. Does technology decrease human suffering or does it add to it? And I think the answer to this is complicated. I think it's more complicated than it might seem on the surface. So technology appears on the surface, at least, and the way that it's sort of marketed and billed to us in our culture. Technology offers us these benefits of greater time, greater convenience, disease treatment, and prevention. This is how we perceive it. Yet I think that this is a distortion, a sort of psychological spell that we've fallen under that's motivated by the same wishful thinking that drives someone who's addicted. So the same process of addiction happening on an individual and collective level. Technology doesn't, in fact, always increase time, convenience, and disease prevention or treatment. We, in fact, may find ourselves more busy and more burdened and more sick than we ever have been. Perhaps that is more of the reality that we live under. So, technology, in that, if we accept that premise, actually does the opposite of what it aims to achieve and what it appears to offer us. And still, when technology does increase time, convenience, and disease prevention and treatment, I still come back to the question, does this actually translate into increased human happiness at our current heights of technological progress where we are now? Are we suffering now at the same time more than ever? What has these heights offered us as far as human happiness? So let's take a little journey back in time to see how this paradigm of technology and progress has these paradoxical effects of seeming to offer more happiness through more control through this process of addiction of, okay, if I can just gain more control over the world, but actually produces the opposite effect. There are some clear examples of this throughout history that if we only stop and reflect on, then we can see this clearly. And this is something that Eisenstein has elucidated so wonderfully in his book, The Ascent of Humanity, and in other aspects of his work. So let's go back to the agricultural revolution, approximately 10,000 or so years ago. So the agricultural revolution was a very significant turning point in human history, and I think really captures this paradoxical effect of technological progress versus human well-being. So technology was supposed to bring us more time and convenience. I'm sorry. Let me back up. Agriculture was supposed to bring us more time and convenience. It was supposed to help negate anxiety about the future, and it was hopefully supposed to reduce illness and death. So in other words, harvesting crops within a very controlled landscape should reduce the amount of time, energy, and uncertainty that would otherwise be dedicated towards hunting and gathering. So it should offer more time and convenience. And as far as anxiety about the future is concerned, having more assurance of where one's food is coming from, we would think would seemingly reduce anxiety about the future. Knowing that the food is in my backyard and we know where it is, we have complete control over food production. This We would think that this would produce greater, this would help reduce anxiety. And of course, having access to food sources that are reliable, food sources that are vetted, should reduce illness and death. Right? This was the promise of agriculture. Agriculture should make humans happier. It should increase quality of life for human beings. This technology should help us, should improve our experience of the world. But I don't think the picture here is so nice and neat. And history tells us a story that's contrary to the one promised by this technology at the time. In fact, instead of providing food security, reducing illness and death, and minimizing competition and conflict between different tribes, agriculture over time eventually propagated a preponderance of famine and disease epidemics and war. So, despite the promise of enhancing leisure and reducing anxiety, the opposite may have occurred. Agriculture led to increased labor and more anxiety about the future. And Eisenstein explains how this worked here. He says, paradoxically, while agriculture raised nature's productivity of food for humans, it also introduced the contemporary concept of labor. Food was at once more abundant, but also harder to get. With agriculture, we had to work today to obtain food tomorrow, a primary example of the paradox of technology, which has brought us to the brink of catastrophe despite its motivating goals of ease, comfort, and security. He also says, here was a source of constant, inescapable anxiety woven into the fabric of life itself. No matter how successful this year's harvest, what of next year? So, this paradox of having more control, but this is what anxiety does to us. The more we get control, the more we seem to, the more we initially reduce that anxiety through control, actually, the more anxiety it produces for us in the long term. This is the process of addiction. It's basically trading out short-term gratification and short-term certainty. I have control, or I am uh, taking away some negative feeling in the short term. But in the long term, it actually fuels the cycle. It increases the amount of anxiety and uncertainty about the future, or it increases the amount of pain and suffering and discomfort we have in the future. We're trading short term certainty and feeling good for more of that in the long term. I hope that makes sense. And we'll try to um, lay that out a little bit clearer in a minute. So this is the illusion of human control being expressed through the paradigm of technology. More control is supposed to lessen anxiety, but paradoxically, it increases it. So the more I can control and predict, actually, the less tolerance I have for uncertainty. And therefore, because I have less tolerance for uncertainty, I want to control and predict even more. This is the definition of anxiety. This is how anxiety disorders develop. in individuals. We're thinking about the future. We're trying to predict the future and control the future in some way. This is just what our brain does. It's a survival mechanism. And in doing that, it feels good in the moment because we're able to gain a sense of certainty. But what it actually does is it actually just reinforces anxiety in the long term and makes it worse because now all of a sudden I don't have a whole lot of tolerance to uncertainty. The more certainty I have, the more certainty that I need to have about the future. And this turns into a positive feedback loop. This is how people spiral into anxiety disorders, whether it's generalized anxiety or social anxiety or OCD. It's there's a positive feedback loop that occurs here where we experience immediate short-term gratification or removal of uncertainty, removal of discomfort. We're basically taking that. But the effect of that is that we lose the tolerance for being able to manage uncertainty and discomfort. And again, positive spiral. And this is not something to judge ourselves too harshly about or feel shame about at all. This is something naturally that's embedded within our mind. I think this is embedded in the individual ego. This is what our ego does. It wants to know that is ego, is that it wants to know and wants to have control over the world. And of course, we have a hard time letting go of that control, trusting and leaning into uncertainty um, and that is ego individually, and I think that is ego manifesting collectively in our species as well. So as a species, the ego wants to have more and more control over the world. And the same process happens. And so we basically end up in this addiction to, okay, just a little bit more technology, just a little bit more technology, a little bit more control. And then we'll be satiated. We'll be fine. Everything will be great as human beings. But look where we've gotten ourselves into today. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so agriculture is not the only example of the illusory promises of technology. So Eisenstein helps deliver a sobering reality to us also here on the medical front. And let me just read from his book here. So this is Eisenstein. Consider the overall effect of the successes of the medical establishment. And that's the medical establishment. I bracketed that. That's what he's referring to, though, in the book. Premature babies have much higher rates of survival, but far more babies are born prematurely. Most of the new pharmaceuticals merely control symptoms, often with several side effects. Hormone replacement therapy is turning out to be a disaster. The same is true for cholesterol lowering medication, antidepressants, and many over the counter drugs. There's been no cure for any of the poster child diseases such as muscular dystrophy and breast cancer. Certainly, no major disease has been wiped out since we conquered the great killers of the 19th century. Coronary artery disease has retreated little, if at all, in 30 years. Cancer is doing just fine, thank you. Arthritis is just as devastating as ever, strokes nearly as common. Alzheimer's disease on the rise. This state of affairs constitutes a great unspoken crisis in medicine. Despite unprecedented billions of dollars in pharmaceutical research, medicine seems to be losing ground in the quote battle against disease. Typically, the response is more technology, more precise control at the genetic and molecular level, a continued search for the cure. End quote. I mean, that just encapsulates it for me. This is the paradox of progress, the paradox of more control. How are we doing as a collective in the realm of disease? I mean, as Eisenstein points out, yes, we have conquered and controlled so many diseases, but at the same time, we have all of these new mysterious things popping up. Autoimmune disease is on the rise. We don't quite understand it. Things like chronic pain and fibromyalgia are on the rise. We don't quite understand it. So, what should we do about that? Should we double down on the same approach that we've been taking to controlling the world, controlling our body through these different mechanisms? Is it the answer more pharmaceuticals, more vaccinations, more control? Or is there some other way? Or is there some middle ground? I don't think myself, or I can't speak for Eisenstein, but I would guess too that no one is arguing here for the elimination of technology, but a different relationship to it with perhaps different goals to be serving a higher good, a higher goal, which is human happiness, versus just simply the continual advance, the continual march of progress in science and technology just for that's sake, which seems to be an addiction that we're caught into. And how AI fits into all this, I cannot wrap my head around. Okay, so basically, I'm saying that this program of science and technology and progress maybe hasn't been so wonderful for human beings. There's a great counter argument to this, of course. People like Steven Pinker in his book Enlightenment Now and others in a similar vein have rightly pointed out that actually science and technology have indeed helped make our world a better place. The world is better today than it was 20 or 50 or 500 years ago. We're at least heading in the right direction. The world isn't perfect by any means, but as long as we continue on this path, we will find ourselves in a continually better position and a continually better world than we inhabited before. And Pinker and others rightly point out how technology has eliminated human suffering in a way. It's reduced famine, it's cured diseases for millions or billions of people across the globe. It's offered access to internet and therefore information and therefore education for people around the world. And this is all true. The question that I think gets lost in all of this is technology making human beings happier on the inside? Are we happier than before? Are we experiencing more or less mental suffering? What is the experience of being a human being today? We don't have to look too far to see that people are fucking miserable. Although a lot of people are pretty fucking happy too. I think I'm pretty happy. But a lot of people are fucking miserable as well. As I mentioned, the rates of anxiety and depression and addiction and suicide continue to grow. We have these horrific mass shootings happening. What is that saying? What is that mirroring back to us about our collective psyche? Things like terrorism, of course, and the god awful wars that are happening around the world right now. What is that saying about our experience of as humans in the world? Is that really built into this um, model, into this equation or measurement of how well we've been progressing as human beings? Are we happier than before? There's more social connectivity and internet, but at the same time, we feel lonelier than ever before. So, this is the question that I think gets lost in all of this. More control on the outside, the illusion of progress, yet greater suffering in totality. More control, greater material progress, yet greater suffering internally. This is an alternative possibility that we may have to recognize and face and figure out how to confront. I think the problem that we're discussing here fundamentally is a spiritual problem. And maybe spiritual isn't the best word to use here. Maybe saying it's a psychological or emotional problem that we're dealing with is the best way to phrase it. I don't know that trying to manipulate or solve this problem on the outside fundamentally will change this process, this egoic process that's happening here. Perhaps this is something that has to happen from the inside out. I don't know that regulating or curbing AI technology, for example, or imposing some other sorts of restrictions or trying to fix or tweak or solve anything on the outside. I don't know that that necessarily will change anything on a fundamental level, change our relationship to science and technology. Maybe something has to transform internally and change flows from the inside out. And this, of course, requires a deep and honest look at our patterns of behavior. Is what we're doing working? Is it creating a world with more or less suffering? Asking the question, is what I'm doing working? Coming back to pragmatism. This is the first step. This is the first step in addiction, is admitting that one has a problem. Recognizing that one's behavior is leading to more suffering and endeavoring to change it. This is a spiritual or psychological or emotional process. This is something that happens on the inside. It requires taking personal responsibility. It involves radical self-acceptance and self-compassion. It invokes a sense of grief for all the time that we've lost engaging in the harmful behavior. It asks for some sort of faith in the unknown. We don't always know what the path forward looks like. It necessitates courage to face that unknown. So these are all internal things: courage, faith, grieving, self-compassion, self-acceptance, personal responsibility, awareness. These perhaps are the ingredients necessary to create a world in the image, to create a world that actually serves our internal well-being. That's the revolution, I think, that maybe we should be prioritizing versus focusing all our energy on trying to solve the problem on the outside, which of course can be helpful in ways. But these elements, these internal elements, this is the process of growing individually. And it's also the process of growing collectively and evolving collectively, I believe. At some point, we must reflect on where we are and where we want to go. A sacred pause, if you will, in order to pursue a better future. The paradigm of scientific and technological progress, while it serves the ascent of humanity, is not necessarily serving our souls. And to break the spell, we must ask different questions with different assumptions. So to come back to our original questions and to tweak them, maybe the questions that we should be asking, that we need to ask about technology, sound something more like this. Might more technology make us feel busier than ever? Might we be slave to more worry and anxiety as technology grows? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. As mental and physical illnesses are cured, will we have less tolerance for discomfort and therefore suffer even more? What will be the meaning of life if the fear of death is eliminated? So maybe we need to put some of those questions front and center as we think about how to move forward with technology into the future in a healthy way. Thank you for listening to The Middle Way. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, share, all that good stuff, and I'll see you back here soon.